And then today our speaker is Gabriel Cira, who's going to introduce to us the Emerald Tutu project, which is a research, engineering, and community effort to mitigate the risk of storm surges on top of rising sea level using green infrastructure. You may have seen the Emerald Tutu in David Abel's documentary Inundation District. I think it's going to be a really excellent way to end the year. So I'll turn it over to Gabriel. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for the introduction, and also just thanks, Andy. Really appreciate the welcome here. Thanks so much, Sarah and Sinette, for setting this all up and making it happen, and really lovely to be here. And audio okay? Can you hear me? Okay, all right. I'll jump in. So yeah, I'm Gabriel Cira. The RA means registered architect. And so sometimes I feel out of place in rooms like this, full of scientists, engineers, and yeah, so first I'm going to start with a little bit of a story about how I kind of got here and what my interests are. And so I put up on this slide just a few of the kind of the variety of things that I do in addition to this project, and I'll attempt to synthesize it and make it make sense for you as to how these all make sense together. I do work on architectural preservation. As you can see, this interesting layers of history being peeled off this building that I'm working on. I do new construction architecture. This is a construction photo of a geothermal greenhouse that I worked on in East Boston. And I do architecture exhibitions and kind of chronicle local histories in architecture, and how kind of architecture and design thinking has shaped mostly the city that we live in. So I'm kind of really interested in kind of local histories, vernacular history, and yeah, the kind of untold stories about the way that the city has become, the city that we live in has become the way that it is, and how different forces have shaped that. And lastly, nature-based infrastructure, which is what this presentation is all about today. So just kind of on a note of synthesizing, I have become really interested in the concept of infrastructure throughout all of these parts of my practice. I simply define infrastructure as something that is social, that is bigger in any way than the kind of ownership of a single person, which is also the definition of being social, I think, and has some kind of democratic or some kind of collective process for determining the kind of rules, benefits, and yeah, the general management of that. So the first slide that I showed was a picture of us, my team and I, collecting seeds in a salt marsh at Barnstable near Sandy Neck. And just to note that the Biden administration was the first administration to put salt marshes under the heading of infrastructure. So it is a kind of a new episteme that we're living in, where it's not like a little bit crazy to be like salt marsh equals infrastructure. Like it's part of the way that we think about natural systems now as infrastructure. So just to get that as an overarching theme. So yeah, anyway, a little teaser of some of the other projects that I've worked on recently. So yeah, the restoration of that building, and just a temporary outside shade structure with someone from the Tufts community, Matt Okazaki, who teaches in Arc Studies, along with Diana, who's here. So a collaborator of mine. But both of these projects are infrastructural in a way because they're social spaces. So a church is obviously a space of gathering. This particular project is not just an architecture design project, but it's about changing the way that the space is used and transforming it into a new kind of social infrastructure, which is an art space for performance, local history, and music, and other art that is related to the Black history that those churches connected with. And yeah, this outdoor space is simply outdoor shared space that was needed to be shady. So we got the commission to do that. And yeah, it's meant to be this kind of room-sized space, 20 feet by 20 feet with an actual volume, questioning the kind of outside and inside, outsideness and insideness of outdoor public space. And suggesting that, yeah, there is a kind of like communal element or an element of even domesticity available in the public way. So anyway, just a little bit of a backstory. So I also teach at MassArt. I hear a little bit of feedback. Okay. I teach at MassArt, and the class that I teach once a year is called Architecture of Boston. And I inherited the course, and it was really an architecture history course. But I have changed this to really focus on the city as a piece of infrastructure and how these collective decisions have been made about various big moves in the city. Everything from the filling of the Back Bay, a body of water, into a neighborhood called the Back Bay, which you can see shown in this image, to, you know, here is the ubiquitous spaghetti spill of the Big Dig, another, you know, more recent massive infrastructure project. So I really kind of try to tell the story of how not just the physical infrastructure is designed and made, but how the kind of political will and the collective, you know, courage and effort to do these huge projects comes to be. So that's the kind of lens through which I tell the history of the city that we live in. And this will conclude my like introduction, so please indulge me. But the major kind of takeaway that I like to give to students is that the city has transformed so much over the last years. And we sort of assume that the state that it's in is somewhat stable, but I would like to suggest that not just due to the kind of threats of climate change, but also our collective efforts to make the spaces that we live in better can change it radically once again. And we shouldn't feel that we're locked into place by the state of the way things are now. So that's kind of the philosophy of the Emerald Tutu project, is like there could be political will, funding, and like the kind of courage to radically change the infrastructural scale spaces that we all use and enjoy. Yeah, old Boston. It's always healthy to kind of look back at the early maps to see, you know, the state of our area before all of the landfill, because it might look very much like this in a few years with, as Andy mentioned, some rising tides. So we will see those coastlines in flux. So with this project, the Emerald Tutu, it kind of started as just an idea, and over the last 5 years or so, I've been working on it in great depth and in many different kind of, from many different angles, to kind of make the case for post-industrial urban settings for nature-based infrastructure, and also to kind of develop the techniques that work in the settings of the type that are in Boston. So this is East Boston, shown here in the industrial heyday as a kind of, you know, shipbuilding and industrial part of town, with Chelsea Creek up here on the side where our site is, the massive test site, which is actually right over here, which you'll see some images of. But yeah, most of the context that we deal with is not marshes, natural marshes, but industrial coastlines that are often hardened, you know, often mixed, like sandy sediment with like chunks of pottery or bricks. So we're dealing with the specifics of post-industrial areas. Yeah, so I mean, it's pretty well known at this point that a lot of the industrial areas in this type of city are next to many redlined and environmental justice neighborhoods, And there's a kind of relationship there, obviously, where the neighborhoods of East Boston and, Dorchester and a lot of the other industrial places are suffering from some of the worst effects of climate change first, flooding and extreme heat. So this history is relating again to this future. So this image is from Climate Ready Boston, the preparedness report from, or series of reports from about 2019 or 18 or so, a series of reports that came out neighborhood by neighborhood. And so is this image about heat. So you can see that East Boston is, a very hot neighborhood as well. Lack of tree cover, just based on the way that the sites are and have been over the years. So where we need nature-based infrastructure is in these tricky post-industrial areas that, especially in historic working harbors like Boston, are very gray and very hard often. And so a few images of also the, maybe the elephant over here, the Logan Airport, which is all landfill, or mostly landfill, this huge excrescence out here built on top of a few little drumlins that were part of the system of Noddle Island out here. You can kind of see that on this map, Noddle's Island. Yeah, there's this really amazing photo set if you're interested in local history of the, I think I have the site here, the National Archives photographer. So this is available on Flickr, and really interesting chronicle of the displacement of neighbors on Neptune Road and some of the other little neighborhoods around Logan Airport as Logan was expanding at this point in the 70s in a major way. So, this is poor quality, I wonder. Okay, well, pixelated, but I think you'll have to believe me that these photos show a Frederick Law Olmsted park that also was bulldozed as part of this Logan Airport expansion. Neptune Road that you're seeing here is this Frederick Law Olmsted designed, beautiful tree-lined boulevard where that ended at Wood Island Park. So this is the map and some old photos of Wood Island Park, and this fellow is holding some childhood photos of him in Wood Island Park. So, we had green infrastructure in East Boston, and it's again part of the kind of push-pull between the industrial and infrastructural expansion of the city. So that brings me to the title, the Emerald Tutu. So obviously kind of a riff on Frederick Law Olmsted's idea for this emerald necklace for the city of Boston as this interconnected series of green spaces that are a kind of multi-use infrastructure as he designed it for the city. Green spaces for social enjoyment, but also stormwater management. This is early green infrastructure from the 1880s and 90s or so. Ideas about managing groundwater and stormwater in the city and getting that out from these deeper areas and into the Charles River and then into the ocean, which of course has been disrupted since then. But yeah, so the Emerald Tutu idea is kind of taking this and putting a spin on it, just being a little cheeky with the title, sticking in your head a little bit better, and thinking less about the kind of bourgeois like decor of a emerald necklace and more of something that is fun and youthful, playful, and not taking itself too seriously. So this was our avatar of the Emerald Tutu in the original kind of video that we made to pitch our idea, where he or she cracks jokes about coefficient of drag and other kind of elements of physical science that could be relevant in multiple ways. So I think also really important to understand the backstory of green infrastructure and the discourse on that in our city today. So I'll also try to give you a little background on that briefly. This idea has been proposed in different ways a few times over the last 5 or 7 years, the harbor-wide hurricane barrier. And there are examples of hurricane barriers that are erected to protect working harbors like New Bedford, or also places in the Netherlands. Venice, the lagoon, has a closable seawall system, that kind of floating barrier. So, huge infrastructure has been built in other parts of the world that serve to protect the city itself. And this was proposed by a kind of coalition of politicians and this engineering firm, Ty and Bond, yeah, basically takes references from those in Louisiana and a lot of the other seawalls that I mentioned before, sea gates, suggesting that we could do it here. Price tag, billions of dollars, many ways to criticize this. I think one super important point that was made by this report, called the feasibility of harbor-wide barriers, dealing with these ideas for the city of Boston, is that the cost of this enormous infrastructure project would be so high that it would be much more beneficial to the actual neighborhoods that are not even shown on this map, to invest those same dollars in improving every kind of fiber of the neighborhood. Every road, every sewer, every system could be fixed, replaced, raised, and houses could be rebuilt for that same price tag. So it's a key question here, where it's like, do you spend all of your money and investment in building an external device that is meant to protect something internally, or do you invest that money in kind of transforming more fundamentally the way that the thing is that you're trying to protect and preserve inside? So a really interesting question about preservation for me, because what this project is saying is that the city needs to be protected as it is today, by an external device. And what I'm proposing as a counter proposal is that the city as it exists today is broken in many different ways. And we should work very closely to fix that on the fine grain, rather than try to imagine some device that sort of makes the problem go away from the outside. So this is, again, the kind of philosophy of our project. So we propose this idea of an Emerald Tutu, or simply of an artificial marsh system. And it's become more than just an idea for floating units that are offshore, which is kind of the original idea here, and more just a kind of call toward greening urban coastlines with nature-based infrastructure, hybrid green-gray infrastructure. So all of what we do is toward that end, still under the kind of umbrella term of the Emerald Tutu. And I like this image because it calls into question this idea of futurism and kind of looking backward at the past, that I think we're confronting a lot today in many different ways, with climate change, with fascism in the US. Maybe I won't get too deep into that today, but that the past and the future might have echoes of each other in different ways. And sometimes that's a good thing, sometimes that's a bad thing. So restoring some of the marshes that existed before all the landfill can be a futuristic initiative for us, but it also is an element of the past. And I'm finding with permitting, that word restoration is actually extremely helpful, rather than proposing something kind of foreign and futuristic. It's oh, this is restoring something that was here before. So anyway, so yeah, here are some of the early images of Emerald Tutu that we created for just to kind of show the concept, the idea of a kind of more inhabitable landscape on the water, connecting different points on the coastline to each other, so that this is showing a kind of daisy chain of key coastal points that would actually be connected by a new kind of pedestrian and bike infrastructure, that then also has this function of damping incoming wave energy, protecting the coastlines, and helping natural marshes inland grow in the kind of buffer areas there. So this is some of the initial ideas, just like thinking really big. And I think the last several years of funded research has been, how do we go from what we have now to infrastructure at this scale? Yeah, here's the report I was mentioning. So just some of the early images. So a lot of what we do is use local and simple biomass, combining them together in hopefully simple ways to make marshes able to grow in places where they couldn't before. So it's an exercise in mixing the properties of materials. Here some words that I put on the screen that kind of generally describe our design approach, which is something that has been developed over the last few years, where instead of kind of adding gizmos or more human-made materials to our units, we're sort of trying to establish more fundamental material relationships with ideally natural materials as much as possible, to make those natural materials have properties that they don't currently. So I don't know, that's a kind of a high level description, but that's just our attitude of making. You could certainly make an artificial marsh by dumping, millions of tons of sediment and protecting that with precast concrete units of some sort, and like make, have a more kind of engineered approach. And I think what we're trying to do is like super simple, work with biomass, low carbon materials, no steel, no concrete, eliminate plastics and microplastics wherever possible, and just design for in the most simple way possible, which is a tall order. It's a big task to do that, because a lot of the ways that we solve our problems as a society is the kind of engineering solutions, which is like, get materials that perform to these specifications and put them to work in this way. And we're trying to get that from like materials that fall apart, that are soft, and that are a little bit less predictable than a lot of your typical engineered product. So, yeah, we've experimented with a bunch of different biomass sources over the last few years. The unit that's shown here is a roll of Phragmites, the invasive Phragmites, inside a coconut fiber tube that then we're rolling to be an extremely dense disc that doesn't shift or stratify in the water. So the things that we've learned through many failures over the years. And this is the core of our best kind of densest biomass-based floating unit for now. So we call it the cinnamon roll or the spiral unit. Oh, good, a GIF is working. It's lovely. We had ideas about the kind of hydrodynamics of such an interconnected system where forces are distributed from unit to unit. I would say that this is a little bit less important, although we did test this on a big scale in a wave flume in Oregon State University in Corvallis. So we built 44 of these in the lab. We had 2 different arrangements and different roughness, so you can see different fabric on it to increase roughness in the water, and tried to quantify the hydrodynamic properties. And you can see from this image that the wave generator is here and the calmer area is here. So it's a pretty simple proposition. The more wet, soft, spongy biomass that you put between storms and coastlines, the calmer your shorelines will be. So a simple but kind of proof of concept here. And yeah, a little snapshot of just gonna check the time real quick. Snapshot of what we've been working on over the last 2-3 years now, is we've invested most of the last 2.5, 3 years on prototyping. So I kind of talked about some of the design principles. That has been our focus, and that has guided basically the direction of this project since those studies at Oregon State University. It kind of affirmed our general direction, and we decided to really invest our time into making those materials work, playing with the plants, seeing if we can make this idea work on the unit scale. And then once we've proven that, you can argue for it to be scaled up. So we have permits to use this area in next to Pierce Park in East Boston. So Pierce Park is right here, and we're in it, assembling it. So we built a floating frame, and we've been building and launching these similar kind of roll style prototypes there for the last couple of years. Yeah, here's Noah and I working on another one of those cinnamon rolls. And I'm abbreviating this talk a little bit and not showing you some of our very many failures, but we've been through quite a lot of iterations. And please suffice it to say that this approach that is creating an extremely dense bundle of biomass rather than a kind of a sack or a pancake of different layers. This is the way to keep the biomass tight enough so that plant roots can have the time and kind of calmness to work their way through the substrate, which is the key for us to making a healthy marsh system, is allowing the roots of marsh grass to infiltrate and take over the substrates that we're building. So that's what we've been trying to do. And this spiral style prototype has been, for the floating versions, the best that we've come to solving that problem. So this is one of our major kind of success stories, I would say. Yeah, so you can see a few photos here, and also here how we put it together. So this is this long tube that then gets rolled together. And yeah, we use a plastic sheet to kind of bundle it in and then slip it into the sleeve and roll it up. And we've tried a lot of different things. I mean, this one does not have coconut fiber at all. We're using just lashing, like a nylon string, to hold the substrate together. And I would abbreviate the whole series of kind of design findings through trial and error by saying that that we really care about materials. So when I say coconut fiber, I'm aware that it's coming in a shipping container from Sri Lanka or India or Brazil, and it might be a very nice natural product, but it has a pretty big carbon footprint. So there's a trade-off there. Coconut fiber and coconut fiber net is a very common material for coastal restoration and for nature-based infrastructure. Often extremely dense kind of sausages, much like this, are used as a kind of basic unit for shoreline restoration, which are really dense and really heavy because they're packed coconut fiber, like loose fibers inside a coconut fiber net. So I guess, one fundamental thing we're trying to do is use a local biomass, which is this waste Phragmites, to, as a cheaper, lower carbon footprint material for the same purpose, which comes with, many unique challenges. So yeah. So we've had some good success with the Spartina alterniflora marsh grass growing out of the floating units here. So here's Noah going for a swim, measuring basically the health of the plants, the number of shoots they're putting up, and the height of them, and comparing that with the how high or low in the water the unit is sitting, which changes over time because the materials get a little bit heavier and are weighed down. So yeah, that was our major research initiative of the year before last, was really trying to quantify the behaviors and performance of our floating units over multiple months to see how the plants work and how the materials are staying together. The ultimate goal of this project, as well as many nature-based infrastructure projects, is to use these materials, but then have the natural systems kind of take over. And right, so like, you know, whether it's coconut fiber or an oyster, like a precast oyster reef or something like that, the idea is you do a human material and then a natural system then takes it over. So having our units and our substrates last long enough, because they will break down, they're biomass, like they're gonna get taken over by algae and like eaten by microbes, invasives, they will break down, but they need to last long enough for the Spartina to take over that structural role. So that kind of like push-pull is the fundamental design challenge for us, is like how the units behave over time. So yeah, tracking that. This is some of our notebooks. And yeah, more of the nice views of them in September and October as they're really healthy and yeah, like Spartina is starting to flourish. So I'll spend the last little bit of the lecture talking about some of our more recent work. We've done a lot of work with Spartina alterniflora and Spartina patens, so salt marsh grass and then or high and low marsh grass. Growing it in greenhouses. Spartina has its own supply chain. There's a nursery in New Jersey that supplies most of the Spartina to a lot of the green infrastructure projects around the region. So, you know, one of the questions we've asked over the last couple of years is, why is this species of Spartina from New Jersey spreading throughout New England? Shouldn't we think about more local sources of marsh grass? But that's the way the supply chain works, which is often just the reality of like thinking at the scale that we're trying to think, is, you know, dealing with the availability of materials and of, in this case, plants. So yeah, we've tried, you can see some successful root mass growing through different mixes of Phragmites and coconut fiber. And we also have tried hemp and other natural fibers. And this time, not in the ocean, but in this flood table in the greenhouse at Eastie Farm Community Group in East Boston. But so yeah, you can see some successful takeover of those roots, like really growing through the fibers of Phragmites and taking over and having its own like really solid mass. And I would say we've had somewhat less success with the full healthy growth of Spartina because of the variable buoyancy in these units. And the way that biomass works in the water column is that things that are made of biomass tend to sink over time. So we've been adding foam, which we don't like to do. How much foam is the question. And so this is like part of our constant existential crisis with design, is how much foam it makes the project not really a viable idea anymore. So anyway, that's a kind of big framing principles for our current state of work. So just last year, we started working with a new collaboration with Dr. Randall Hughes from Northeastern University, an amazing marsh scientist, and also other coastal plants, like she also does eelgrass and other coastal ecosystems. So we started to use some of the same techniques that we developed, like bundling Phragmites and coconut fiber really tightly to make different types of objects more destined to be living shorelines rather than floating units. So we started kind of mass producing these crescent-shaped pieces. Here's Randall Hughes here. So yeah, the unit has transformed into these kind of arc-shaped pieces that then we're aggregating together to make dense mats of Phragmites that, as you can see here, don't have coconut fiber on the outside of them. So that's a new idea for us, is trying to really focus on frag and not more exotic material from a different continent. Also, you can see some of the Climate Corps fellows that we were working with. So we were working with a team of basically young people who are learning about green jobs that are available to them, of a huge variety. And we're trying to teach them hands-on skills. And I think that's also part of our kind of community engaged process, is that we're based in East Boston and we're dealing with a lot of these nonprofits that are there, affordable housing groups, community organizing groups like Eastie Farm, or the Sailing Center. There's actually quite a lot of them in East Boston, and so like really kind of installing ourselves into the social ecosystem of East Boston. So we had one crew that was Spanish speaking last year, so we actually had a translator with us, learning about all of these green infrastructure materials and methods. And yeah, some views of the Climate Corps fellows working together, bundling these crescent shapes into more flat mats, which are, again, very, very dense, but in this case, a lot flatter than the cinnamon rolls, which were a little bit hunkier. So yeah, our site is this kind of crazy and strange city-owned parcel that we use for free out in East Boston, called the Hess site. Used to be an oil tank farm, and it's really part of this post-industrial landscape that is East Boston. Here's the salt piles for all the road salt for the region, right across Chelsea Creek. And yeah, oil tankers come in and out of this channel still, including jet fuel that goes to the tanks that supply Logan Airport. So it's really an active infrastructural setting that we're working in East Boston. It also has a lot of Phragmites on it, so that's where we go, put on our waders and cut down wheelbarrowfuls of Phragmites, bring it up, and then treat it in different ways, bundle it, and manufacture these units of different kinds. So yeah, there you go. So here's Breeze and a couple of the other fellows working on harvesting and bringing up these wagonfuls of frag. And here's Noah also. We have a little anyway, I don't have time to get into the hydrology of the Hess site, but we have one area that has salt water that is tidally available. Rather, most of the rest of the site is freshwater, which is why there's frag growing there, not a salt marsh. And so we actually have a little tidal area where we can do more material experiments in this concrete tank. So this gets flooded by salt water twice a day. And so yeah, we had more root experiments in there. We also last year got permits to use a different intertidal post-industrial site in East Boston to deploy all of our living shoreline prototypes. So this is at 102 Border Street. It's a pretty much unused site. I mean, there's parking and a harbor walk there, but no development, owned by a local CDC that has let us use it. And so we have permits from Boston Concom to use this as an experiment deployment site. So yeah, this is photos of us taking these prototypes down into the rocky intertidal area here, which you can see has these rails that go into the water for the historic site use of launching boats, taking boats in and out and working on the bottoms of boats. And you can see we're actually using some of the post-industrial rejectamenta to weigh down the biomass, kind of this opportunistic approach to using what's already there. Ultimately, the biomass will be waterlogged and will not want to float, but for the first few months or year, we need to keep it in place. So anyway, lots of other design challenges based on working in a post-industrial site. And, like you can put a stake in, and you go through the, well, not here, but down here, you go through the rocky layer, and then it's just like, it's like this layer of muck under there. So being responsive to the site is really important, and just you can't really assume anything about the way that the coastline is in post-industrial area, because it's changed so much over the years. So yeah, it's dumb and simple, like put rocks on the top of the prototype so they don't float, but it's effective, and we're trying to not be irresponsible with our material uses. So, a few more photos of the layout there. We tried this ring shape piece, which I'm happy about, and we might do more of these this year. And yeah, more of these crescents, which are huge. That's another thing, is like we're really trying to scale up and cover this site with biomass and try to get basically a marsh established. So yeah, with Randall Hughes, we were planting these with Spartina plugs, watching how the roots grow, watching how the shoots behave over the season. And they spent the winter out there. So about now, we'll be seeing if there's anything surviving. If not, why not? Are some of the key questions. So this is all 2024. So yeah. Working with the Climate Corps Fellows was so much fun, because you're working as a team. It's all hands-on. We sort of don't know exactly what we're doing. We're being responsive to the elements of the site. And it's hard to teach that to young people, to say, like, we have to go figure it out. Like, we think we know how to do it, but that might change as we get to the site. So kind of key elements of what it means to labor outside in sites that you're not perfectly familiar with. And then we've also been visiting lots of marshes, like that first slide that I showed, with some of the Climate Corps Fellows or on our own, because of that question about the supply chain for Spartina. We're wondering if we can grow Spartina from seed ourselves. We're wondering how the seed populations are doing in some of our local marshes, like how viable are they? So in 2023 and again in 2024, during seed time, which is for Spartina is like end of September, early October, you have a window of time where you can go collect viable seeds. So 2023, we collected some seeds. 2024, we collected 900,000 seeds, because we were like, let's go, we're gonna mass produce this and like do bigger experiments. So that's what's coming up in our future, is like trying to do much bigger kind of pre-grown mats of Spartina in Phragmites, like dead Phragmites. See about growing things from seed rather than from plug. So we're really just working on the techniques, like what we're going to use for that. So yeah, some nice photos from seed collection, baggies full of seed heads that we basically rip off and take. Yeah, here's what Spartina seed head looks like, with some weird little rot in it, which I would be curious to know if you have comments on. And then we do our best to remove them from their stems, put them in these tubs and stratify them for the winter and prepare them for growing. So the most recent things that we've been doing, and I'm getting to the end of my slide, I'm gonna skip that, is putting the seeds in water under grow lights or in a greenhouse. I mean, this is the perfect February, March activity, where it's way too cold outside to do any work in East Boston on the waterfront, and seeing how they grow. So we collected seeds from how many different, like almost a dozen, I think 9 or 10 different locations, and tested them. This is in my basement in some grow lights. Maybe raise some eyebrows with the neighbors, but hey, and some of the results for the success of that. And then we also did more, we used a heating pad in a greenhouse for another set of experiments to, really see the viability of the seeds. So here's that experiment with a heating pad under. Anyway, so these are some of the locations that we collected from, and generally are results for germination rates and seed viability. So actually the marshes on the Cape, Falmouth and Barnstable, were really, really good seed populations. And some of the like Rowley is where a lot of the Northeastern researchers go typically to get their seeds, which actually pretty low viability. So interesting how just like geographic position of where you are like influences how your research is going to work. But and Belle Isle is pretty good. Belle Isle Marsh is the marsh that is in East Boston and Revere. So not bad. Anyway, shout out to Kayla, my team member who's here, who's been doing all of this work with me, and also Noah, who just left to go to grad school. And yeah, really happy to work together in a team. I'm an architect somehow. I'm confused about what I am a lot, but Kayla is a scientist, so we have good dynamic. We're always collaborating with scientists like Randall Hughes, Julia Hopkins on hydrodynamics, and like we really love to collaborate. Here's Drew, who works at BU and is an oyster researcher now, so really awesome community of scientists that we've created. So yeah, anyway, I'll conclude there. Our fundamental thing is like how we go from like playing with seeds, playing with Phragmites and all these materials, and try to really make nature-based infrastructure function on the small scale so we can scale it up to the scales that we really need to have an impact on the cities that we live in. So anyway, thank you for listening.
Thank you, Gabriel. If anyone's got questions, I'll bring the microphone.
Hi, thank you for the great presentation. I'm very curious, how are you guys planning on doing the mooring systems? It seems like you guys are trying to use all biodegradable stuff. I'm curious how, what the expected lifespan of these infrastructures are.
Great question. Yeah, I mean, so we have done, I kind of skipped over a lot of this story, but we've done floating deployments in a lot of different places, a couple in Connecticut, Beverly. We have 3 in the water in Lynn now, and obviously East Boston. So we've tried a lot of different anchoring styles, sometimes just borrowing someone's mooring that has offered it to us. But usually we just use a 50-pound or 100-pound like metal pyramid anchor with chain and rope with the correct shackles. And these guidelines are usually given to us by the local harbor masters. But that being said, if you're talking about much bigger implementations, I would like to reduce that weight because you have redundancy. But honestly, it's a little bit conceptual at this time. Like we haven't actually built a network bigger than 3 units. So at the 3-unit scale, we're still using pyramid anchors, which is working okay. But yeah, I think the overall point is that redundancy is our approach. Like no gigantic anchors that are small enough to deploy from a small launch boat rather than like massive construction.
I'm sorry, I should have prefaced. I'm a PhD student here. I also do nature-based solutions, nature inclusive design, and I'm working on artificial reefs. And I feel like I'm really fascinated with the work you're doing. And I feel like I'd love to talk to you afterwards.
Sure, yeah, please, yeah. I mean, people often say like, why don't you put oyster balls underwater and connect your things to that so that there's a kind of like double whammy of oysters and marshes, so yeah.
Hi, thank you. I was wondering, do you expect to be doing long-term maintenance on these units, or do you hope for it to be somewhat kind of self-sustainable, letting natural systems take over like you were talking about?
Yeah, also really amazing question. I mean, the short answer is, I think maintenance is going to be required. But a lot of what we're doing with the Climate Corps fellows is teaching them to know what needs to be done to be able to maintain such a natural system. I think this is a really important point. We're trying to kind of like cultivate a local body of knowledge for that labor. There's a lot of money right now for, well, I don't know about right now, but there has been a lot of money for green job training, kind of transitioning the workforce away from carbon. So we've been able to do training for these workforce programs to teach them what it would mean to not just build them, but to maintain them. So yeah, I think there definitely are aspects of maintenance, and we expect to do that, or to have that be, part of the, activities of the Park Service if these are city owned, for example. So yeah.
Thank you.
Hi, great talk. I'm actually a postdoc in Randall Hughes's lab.
Oh,
And I just wondered if you'd touch some more about the Climate Corps Fellows and how that partnership came about and some of the environmental justice work that you all are doing over there, because I think that's a really cool part of extending the nature-based solutions into the community.
sure. Well, I mentioned a couple times this nonprofit community group in East Boston called Eastie Farm. We helped them write a grant. They had never brought in NSF funding before, and that was something that we had some familiarity with. So they're a community-based organization. And so a couple of years ago, we were like, hey, there's a really cool community research program called the Civic Engagement Program that is a good amount of money. It's kind of what you do already. We can help you write the grant. So we brought in funding to support them as a community-based organization to manage research, and sculpted this program of Climate Corps fellows, like the type of training, the type of science that we're exposing them to. And then we obviously participated in the program and worked with the young people. So that was interesting. It was a chance for us to kind of design the whole curriculum of how to train young people to work with their hands, but also understand a plant system and just have, like some basic intuitive sense of like the health of a marsh, or basic understanding of how marsh grass like changes throughout the year, when it seeds, when it grows, and yeah, so that's how the program came about. And it was a really interesting learning experience. I would say, some of the fellows were amazing and really into it, but some were just like, I don't want to be in a marsh. And I think that's a really important thing to know, is that when you're working with people, you really have to understand their, what they want to be doing. Some people come into our orbit and we're like, oh yeah, it's a marsh person. It's just like someone who's just going to grab the boots and be like, let's go. But other people are, so yeah, I think that's a major learning experience for us. It's just like meeting people where they're at.
I actually have a question along the people line and also more on the biological or non-biological side. I start with the small one. And my question was, have there been any unintended or surprising consequences of having these things floating in the water? And the second question is about people. As somebody who is in environmental studies, working in an interdisciplinary team is key to everything our practitioners will do. And it sounds, you already alluded that your team is composes people from all kind of backgrounds. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about what it is like to work with so many different experts, and how do you make things move forward?
Sure, yeah, good question. So, well, um, a lot of what I was showing involves scientists and scientific thinking, but is extremely trial and error, and it's very hands-on. And I've come to realize that this is the opposite of the scientific method, or maybe it's a kind of compressed and accelerated version of that. But that's kind of what we call like a design process, an iterative design process. So elements of design thinking and trial and error and just like hands-on, like trying things, and then if it doesn't work, adapting, is something that I find that like maybe my background as an architect and a tinkerer is something that I bring as a spirit. And then scientists are like, no, it doesn't work there. We have to do this. And so it's a good mix of types of expertise for that. I find that like, yeah, I feel like scientists want to like set the variable very, very clearly and make sure they understand exactly the results that occurred from this trial, and then write it up and then think about the next thing. And for us, it's a lot more kind of multiple and simultaneous. It's like figuring out multiple questions in one day or prototype. And then I guess the final thing to say is that working with plants is really challenging, because if they die, you don't really know why exactly. If they live, you know that everything that you did is right. But if they die, you know that one thing that you did is wrong, and you don't know which one. So that's also this like type of uncertainty that is part of how we work. That is, yeah, it's interesting to work through that. Yeah, anyway, yeah. And we had one other question. Oh, yeah, well, we had a moment in Lynn actually recently where we saw some scouring of sediment that, well, not a floating structure, but one of our living shoreline prototypes caused. And so that was sort of a negative consequence, I guess. But this is a complex site with a wrecked seawall that is already causing all kinds of scouring and weird hydrodynamic and sediment effects. So yeah, I mean, so yes, sometimes we break things.
Hi, thank you. Could you go back to the last slide that showed like the full proposal, like for the Emerald Tutu around East Boston? I think you
The
had like
final
one.
slide,
Yeah, it was like
sure.
the last one. Sorry, I didn't realize it was so far.
Many. Yeah.
Somewhere in there.
Okay.
Yeah. So this might be a question more for the scientists in the room than the architects in the room, but say that there was funding available for this entire project, and you had the staff to do it, you had the political willpower, the community support, et cetera. What is the time scale where this goes from being, you know, this network of floating cinnamon rolls to being recognizable as a coastal salt marsh? Are we talking decades? Are we talking a human lifespan? Is it multi-generational before this happens? What are we looking at? Do we know?
Yeah, important question. All systems go, we can, I mean, build these things really quickly, and the limiting factors like human power and the availability of the waste biomass. If you want to stick to our kind of design philosophy of using simple available biomass. But I mean, we can build one of those cinnamon roll things in less than a day with a few of us using super simple tools. You know, I've like scratched my head and thought about what like a factory would look like to mass produce them. But we haven't really gotten there yet. But yeah, I mean, I would say like it's entirely reasonable to grow new salt marshes within 3 or 5 years. I mean, that's why I like to have, the city scale as well as a bit of a zoom in, so you can start to count the units and say like, well, so far in the last 5 years, we've built like 30 or so total units of different kinds. I mean, depending on how you define unit, but so that's like this much, so we're getting there, right? And we're still just like screwing around a little bit. So definitely avoiding the answer or avoiding the question, but
Hi, thank you for the presentation. I was wondering if it may not be far enough along yet, but if you've seen the differences between the wave dampening effects and also the habitat creation of these floating systems versus something. I mean, I'm most familiar with like living breakwaters in New York, which is the reef that's built further offshore and is natural or using oyster deposits, but is a kind of harder infrastructure approach.
yeah.
Yeah, so if any major differences between those two kind of styles.
That's the Scape project, right? Yeah.
Yeah, the Scape, I think it's in Jamaica Bay.
Yeah.
Or near Jamaica Bay.
So this is really trying to use biomass. And so that's, yeah, as you said, hard materials. But on the floating units that we've done, we've seen a lot of invasives, tunicates, and little, I forget what they're called, these little shrimp that do little sit-ups. But a lot of invasives, in addition to lots of algae growing on the bottom. So they're really quickly colonized by whatever's in the water column. And since they're floating, they're getting like what's in the very top of the water, the top layer, obviously. That's unique to Boston Harbor. And yeah, I mean, I would say like, we don't have super sophisticated ways of looking at this other than observing the substrate, like how quickly it's breaking down, like what color is it, how soft is it, how it's being taken over by all the microbes that then create filaments and turn it into a slime. So yeah, I mean, we've seen crabs, the birds, lots of different types of birds are happy to have a little kind of floating outpost with a little fuzzy stuff. So there's there's like bird crap on the units a lot. So that's a good sign. Often bits of shells. So they get taken over very quickly in Boston Harbor.
Okay, last question of the year is yours, as Alex.
Oh boy, no pressure. I may have missed this. What is the long-term vision of what this would look like in 50 years? Like, is the idea that it would still be floating on type of foam somehow, despite the fact that the nature has taken over, or is it supposed to kind of turn into a salt marsh? And if it is supposed to float, like, how does that work?
Yeah. Well, the initial idea of these like floating units, we've done tons of work on that. And what I was really trying to show in the last bit of the talk today was how we've shifted our focus to living shorelines in the last year and a half. And that's because the end game with those is basically a nice functional marsh on a post-industrial coastline, which does not require foam, doesn't require us to like think about maintaining moorings and things like that. So like simplifying that goal. So I would say that that's the biggest vision, like 50-year vision, is that our coastlines could be really healthy marshes that are, they might look a little bit different from a natural marsh, or maybe some of them are like quite indistinguishable from a natural system next door. So yeah.
Okay, thank you, Gabriel.
Thank you.